to the third episode of Coming Musical Fat Rankings. I'm Stephen Nicholson, and together with my brother Paul, we'll be ranking all of ELO's albums from the early 1970s through to 2019's From Out of Nowhere. The rated scale we will use ranges from Mr. Blue Pie to Can't Get These Songs Out of My Head, with alright songs in the middle. So with nearly 15 albums to rate, there could be a showdown. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you. Okay, so the first ELO album, which I think it had a couple of different titles. One was maybe, I think it was maybe just called The Electric Light Orchestra, and maybe No Reply was another title given to the album. It was an album I had heard many years later after listening to all the singles. And the main single, the single on this is 10538 Overture. And this album, I'm going to put in all right albums. It's very kind of prog rock, sort of. The songs are quite long, and there's maybe 6, 7 songs on the album. And it's very kind of about, very prog rock. And so it doesn't really show you where the band will go, I suppose, but it's a wee introduction. So the second album is very similar, actually, in the sense that, because Roy Wood, he was in the band for the first 2 albums, and it's still got that kind of sound, and the orchestra's quite high up in the mix as well, and they haven't managed to capture that great balance that the band would get at this point. So the second album, called ELO 2, which had Roll Over Beethoven on it, I'm going to put that in all right albums as well, just like the debut album. And the third album, that's when things start getting a bit better, and I'm going to put that in Strange Magic. So on this album, they had songs like Mama Bell and Showdown. So they were starting to become more commercial, and you were beginning to develop that classic ELO sound. And then the next album, actually, although it's not a well-known album, in fact, it didn't even chart in the UK. At this point, ELO were bigger in America, but it's actually my favourite ELO album. It's called El Dorado, and it's a music concerto, and it's basically, I suppose you would say it's like a concept album, and it has Can't Get It Out of My Head, which wasn't a big hit in the UK, but it's one of my favourite songs as well. And I just love the album, how it mixes rock and classical together, and it is quite prog rocky, but songs, about like William Tell and stuff like that. But I just love the sound, and it's the first time that they'd used like an orchestra with vocals, like a choir and stuff. So the sound is absolutely amazing. So that's actually right up the top there, El Dorado. And the next album is Face the Music, which came out in 1975. And I'm going to put that, Can't Get These Albums Out of My Head. And they were becoming more commercial now, and this had Strange Magic and Evil Woman on it. So that was good. But interesting enough, these albums didn't chart in the UK at the time, but not top 10 in America. So the band are really kind of building steam here.
Yeah. And
the next album, A New World Record, is a brilliant album, and I'm going to move that there. And I don't actually think it's charted in the UK, although it had big singles on it. It had classics like Telephone Line and Living Thing. And it's a great album, actually. It's got that mixture of
it never charted?
Classical. No, I don't think so in the
Despite
UK,
having such big hits on it?
Yeah. Or if it did, it was like very low. The albums were bigger in America initially.
Yeah.
So that was 1976. And then, of course, it all leads up to what is, I suppose they would be classed as their Sgt. Pepper, which is Out of the Blue, which is a double album. And it had like quite a few singles on it. Of course, the most famous one being Mr. Blue Sky, and it had Sweet Talking Woman. And it had what did it have? It had Turnstone and just a really eclectic mix, and it was almost like Jeff Lynne at his peak, I suppose. That, and this was also recorded with Mac, who would go on to produce Queen
Didn't
from the
know that.
Game album onwards. Yeah, he did this one in Munich.
Right.
Yeah, have you heard? You've probably heard the singles and stuff.
I listened to the album for the first time. We're obviously going to be doing a podcast episode
That's
dedicated
right.
to it in a couple of months, so I just listened to it for the first time all the way through the other day. Yeah, it's a great album. Excellent.
Yeah.
Familiar with a lot of the
Great.
songs already. A lot of them are
Mm-hmm.
very famous, but yeah, it's a great album.
Yeah. Yeah. And the next album that came out 2 years later in 1979 was Discovery. And at this point, the band kind of developed more into, I suppose there was a disco craze at the time. So the band, a lot of these songs you could argue are quite disco-y, but they've got classics on there like Confusion, and you've got Last Train to London, which is very disco, and
Yeah.
a bit of that song was sampled in a R&B song in the early 2000s. And you've got The Diary of Horace Wimp, which is a bit like a sort of granny music from the Beatles style, as John Lennon would say. And but it's a really good album actually, and they for a lot of the songs in the album they actually did promo videos for. Yeah, and Hold On Tight, that was one of the songs as well. Shine a Little Love. What do you think of this album, Stephen?
No, I listened to it, but there's a lot of good tunes in it
Mm-hmm.
based on obviously the songs that were released as singles that have appeared on the best ofs, which I'm familiar with. So
Yeah,
yeah, I know it's one you said I should check out, so I may well do that before the year is out.
yeah. And I made a mistake. It's not hold on tight. It's Don't Bring Me Down. That's
Don't bring
that's
me
the
down.
that's the
Don't bring me
single.
down. Bruce.
Bruce, don't bring me
Bruce.
down. So so we then go into the 80s, and it's a soundtrack. And I'm going to put so this film was a musical, and it was a massive flop. And but the soundtrack album is actually really good. The first half of it's various artists, including Cliff Richard, Olivia Newton-John. The second half of it's all ELO songs. And I think those songs are some of their best songs, and it's the last time that they'd used that orchestra. In fact, Jeff Lynne would ever use an orchestra again in the same way. And you had songs like Don't Walk Away, which is one of my favourites. You had All Over the World. So a lot of good, and of course the title track, which was their only UK #1 with Olivia Newton-John, which was Xanadu, which it was you that introduced me to that song, Stephen, because I'd heard ELO, a lot of their main songs, but I hadn't heard that until you had that compilation album in the late 90s. You remember the one?
Mm. Yeah, no,
Mm.
I hadn't heard Xanadu the song until I still remember it because I think it's one of my all-time favorite songs, and I'm sure I was working in the bank at the time on George Street here in Edinburgh, and I was down in the stationery room, and I think things needed cleaned up, so I was down there because I think I had a hangover, and that came on the radio, and I thought, oh, sounds like
Mm.
ELO, brilliant, brilliant song. So yeah, I remember buying the best of from the mid-90s, which was called something time. Well, no, Light Years,
That's right,
the
yeah.
best of ELO, and
Yeah.
that was on it, and it hadn't been on the previous kind of greatest hits best
Yeah,
of.
I was just thinking, why wasn't it on the previous? I wonder if there was some
Don't
sort
know.
of
I
copyright
think the
thing that,
copyright
yeah, that they
when they
couldn't have it
done
on the other.
no, and it was
Mhm.
obviously a redone taking it with Jeff Lynne singing when it was on the future best of.
Yeah,
But yes, for me, it's Yellow's best song, and it's one of my favorite songs of all time. Brilliant slice of pop perfection.
yeah. It's a brilliant song, yeah.
Yep.
And we then move on to a different style for Yellow, which is the album Time. And they would no longer use orchestra, and a lot of this was another concept album, and it's imagining. I think it's 2095, is it? And it's supposed to be set in the future and robots and the music's all quite of its time, the early 80s, drum machines and synths and stuff. So there's no orchestra, but it's almost like Jeff Lynne's using this new style. So some of it comes off, some of it doesn't come off. But like Stephen was saying on the compilation album, the opening track on this was Twilight, which was a great song. And I hadn't heard that either until this.
That's right.
So the ELO sound was changing at this point. So you had Twilight, Ticket to the Moon, which is a great song as well. And yeah, so it's a really good album. Have you heard some of the songs on here, Stephen? Obviously,
only the singles, but the singles are good on it there. Although, as you say, it's a very different, maybe more keyboardy sound and shift away from the orchestra, which you can understand. He spent most of the 70s with that sound, and obviously just keen to move on.
Yeah, totally. So the next album for me, I'm going to put here, is it's quite a poor album. I think at this time Jeff Lynne was losing interest in the band, and it just sounds very dull and half-hearted and almost like it sounds very dated now. And they did the song Rock and Roll is King, which for me was like, it felt a bit forced, like let's try and make a hit. And it almost sounded a bit like your dad at a karaoke machine or something, try to be cool.
No, I can't think
singing
it's
a rock and
song.
I just think it's a bit cringy. But the rest of the album actually isn't like that. It's got some decent songs in it, but yeah, for me, it's probably my least favourite album of theirs. And it was actually 3 years ago, because it was originally conceived as a double album, but the record company didn't want it, which I can understand, actually.
What was
so
that?
Actually, 3 years ago.
Oh, sorry, on you go.
Yep. So the original double album was released 3 years ago the way it was intended to be. And so the singles were Rock and Roll is King, Four Little Diamonds, and Secret Messages, the title track. So that was it. So not a great album for me. And then ELO's last album, I suppose the original incarnation, which really was only 3 members at that point. You had Kelly Groucutt, you had Jeff Lynne and Bev Bevan, the drummer. So you had the bass, the singer, and the guitarist. And I actually think it's better than Secret Messages, the previous album. It is very much of its time, and Jeff Lynne's totally bored with ELO at this point, and the sound's very dated. But it's got
he wants to be a travelling Wilbury now, doesn't he?
That's right. Yeah. 2 years after that, and a producer. But Calling America, I mean, that's a great song.
Yeah,
and it's very much of its time. But I think it's a decent album. It's certainly not the worst. The next album was when Jeff Lynne went 2001. So I guess this was 15 years after the Balance of Power album. And then, although this album, it says it's Electric Light Orchestra, ELO. It's not. It's just really Jeff Lynne and Richard Tandy, the keyboard player. So the sort of ELO lineup that we know, this has changed from here. So there's some decent songs on it, but it sounds very much like the Traveling Wilburys or George Harrison, but it doesn't sound like ELO. And
so it's not got
it's just that sort of
traditional ELO sound. Yeah.
No, there's no orchestra, and it just sounds like sort of Jeff Lynne acoustic guitars high in the mix that he made in the late 80s. So it's basically a Jeff Lynne solo album. But there's some like good songs on it, but it's not a great album. Excuse me. And it wasn't particular big hit. And then we
Yeah.
fast forward to 2015, which,
Mm.
due to, I think it all came from Chris Evans mentioning on his radio show how much he wanted ELO to get back together. So Jeff Lynne then did a show at London Hyde Park in 2014. And then what was nice, because ELO were always seen as a guilty pleasure and almost like
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't cool to like them, but they did some amazing stuff. So it kind of became cool to like them. And the Hyde Park gig was a big success, and Jeff Lynne finally got the credit that he deserved and the acclaim. But
Yeah.
it is really it's Jeff Lynne and Richard Dandy, the keyboard player, and it's now known as Jeff Lynne's ELO, so not to confuse it with the other spin-off bands that the other members had. So Alone in the Universe, I'm going to put that. I'm going to put it in all right. The song that is the first single from the album, When I Was a Boy, that's a brilliant song. It sounds very sort of mid-70s John Lennon. And but like the previous album, it's Jeff Lynne solo really, with the guitars, no orchestra. But it's a good album, but it's not on a patch with like the original ELO albums from the 70s and early 80s. Have you heard any of the stuff from it, Stephen?
Yeah, I own this one. I liked
Mm.
it that much. I then purchased it on vinyl as well.
Mm.
So yeah, no, I really like this album. I get what you mean about it sounding more like a Jeff Lynne solo album. It's obviously very much a Jeff Lynne production from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's good. Just good songs from beginning to end on it there. A good listen. Maybe no bells and whistles on it, but yeah, if you want to have put something on, just enjoy some music. Good album. Yeah, I probably agree with
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you've got it there. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's a strong, good album. Good listen.
Yeah. The final album, which came out 2 years ago, it was a UK #1 album. I have to be honest, I haven't listened to it that much.
No,
The first single, which actually I can't remember what it was called. That shows you how much I've listened to it.
I,
But I remember thinking the first single was really good. Do you know what one it is? Do you know the?
I can't remember. No, I can't. I
No,
only
I
ever
remember
listened
it
to
being
it once.
catchy. Yeah. So I mean, I've only listened to the album maybe twice, so that's why I've put it in that section there. It didn't.
Yeah.
It's quite a short album as well. It didn't really stick out to me as being. It's just kind of following that same pattern since the mid-80s Jeff Lynne solo. I wish actually he would get back to actually have an orchestra and and create a new album. That would be like a real ELO album for me.
Yeah, that would be
And
good.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's all my rankings of the ELO albums.
So if Paul, if somebody was saying to you, "Look, I've never listened to ELO in my life. What album should I
Mm-hmm.
start with? Obviously, other than the best of and live albums, which studio album should I start with?"
I would say part of me would say Out of the Blue because it's got quite a lot of singles on it, but because it's a double album, it might be a bit too much for someone. So I would probably say A New World Record, actually, the second
Right.
album that I've got second, and that's got like Rockaria, which is the orchestra at the intro, and
Yeah.
it's got Living Thing and Telephone Line, and it's a single album. So I think that's quite commercial sounding. For me, Eldorado's the best album, but I don't know if it's the best album for someone to hear as their first introduction to the band. So I would say A New World Record from 1976. That would be a good album for someone to get into ELO.
A good primer. Okay. Thanks for
Yeah.
that, Paul, and thank you
Thank
all
you.
thank you all for watching. If you like what you see, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and leave some positive comments. If you want to hear more from us, head over to our website and check out our podcast where we trim albums that are too damn long. You'll find episodes there dedicated to Oasis, Pink Floyd, Queen, REM, U2, Metallica, The Beatles, Guns N' Roses, Paul McCartney, and Bruce Springsteen. And we add a new episode every week, so So remember to subscribe. Before I turn to stone, I better say goodbye. So